Hello, Greg Candido here, and today I would like to talk about specific guidelines on how to accumulate chips early in a tournament. So a lot of people ask me, how do I play early stages of a tournament? And I have a little bit method to my madness, and I would like to share it with you today. So, with further ado, let's get started. And okay, so first thing we're going to start is when I'm first in, we always bring it in for a raise. You don't want to be the player that limps into pots. The first thing I always give advice to a poker player when I watch them and I see them limping with, queen jack suited, these middle speculative hands that are good enough to play a hand, but, are not monsters. And I see they limp into it and they'll call someone else's raise. First thing you want to do is you want to be able to get rid of all that out of your play. You always, if you're entering, your first one to enter into a pot, you want to come for a raise, okay? And generally in the early stages of the tournaments, if you're under the gun or early position under the gun +1, you want to bring it in for 2.5 times the big blind. And from middle position, you probably want to bring it in for like 3x. And then from late position, like the button or the cutoff, you want to go 3x, maybe possibly 4x, just because people are going to see those button raises and cutoff as probably have a weak speculative hand. But the good thing about doing that, when you are pumping up the pot by making a 3x raise in the early stages of the tournament, is that, you're going to try to thin down the field, define their ranges a little bit, and then you're also going to have position onto them. And we'll talk about position later. But first thing you want to do is you definitely want to come in for a raise. It allows you to represent a big, strong holding like ace, king, big pocket pairs, jacks, king, queens, ace, king. So people aren't going to know that. So if you're raising with hands like queen, jack, queen 10, 9, 8, suited connectors, they don't know if you have that or if you have a big hand like ace, king, or queen. So you're staying very balanced. And because you brought it in, they know. Because you brought it in for a raise, they don't know where you're at. So you just want to stay balanced with your bet sizing. So your bet sizing doesn't. So usually in this position, the early stage of the tournaments, from early under the gun, I make it tend to be smaller because you're going to probably get a lot of callers behind you. And, I just want to be able to keep the pot smaller when I'm out of position in a hand. And when I do have position, I don't mind putting more chips, especially early on in a tournament where I'm going to make my bets like 3, 4x. So if I have ace, king on the button, I'm going to open it up 3x, 4x, charge the people coming in for it, and I have a monster. They're not going to know that. I'm also going to do that same thing if I open up with 9, 8 on the button and charge those players to come in. So another reason is to, one other things you want to do is there ever a point where you weren't limping? Yes. I mean, I'm not saying that you have to take limping out of your entire range of hands to play. So generally when I limp from early position, you'll never see me really limp from late position. The only time that I'll over limp somebody is other limps after. I have no problem with that, but you'll never see me open limping from the button with any of my range. And that's something that should be totally out of there. So I see people where people limp with aces on the button and then they get cracked and people are shaking their head why. So there's no reason why you should be limping any big hands on the button unless you have a definitive reason why. And I should be able to ask you, why did you do that? Because you might say, oh, the big blind's not going to believe me. They're going to 3-bet me, 4-bet me. It's going to be trapping. But generally, you should just play those hands hard and fast against those type of villains. All right. But let me give you some reasons why I would limp in. I generally would limp in like with small pocket pairs from early positions, such as hands like 2s through 6s to 8s. With those kind of hands, I would definitely be limping, and then I can call a small raise and try to set mine and pretty much play fit or fold poker and get out because I'm out of position. You'll never see me limp anywhere from middle position on. I'm only would be limping from early position with those type of hands, small to medium sized pocket pairs. And medium sized pocket pairs may be going up to as high as 10-10, 9-9, definitely 9s, maybe 10s, depending on the stack. But we're talking about the early stages of the tournament where, if you get pocket 10s, you don't really want to go crazy there. Another way I would also limp, I like to also limp suited connectors, like not suited connectors, suited aces where I would limp like ace-4 suited under the gun, where I can call small raise. Hopefully, if I can flop 2 of my suit, I can go with it and try to build a pot and go for it from there. So I'm keeping it kind of small, be able to call a raise with it, and then be able to build a big pot to win a big pot on the later streets. So I'm not really want to try to blow the pot out of it, because when you start raising with ace-4 under the gun, like if you have ace-4 under the gun that's suited, you know, you're bloating a pot to hopefully that you're hit flop a draw. I mean, then you might be turning your hand into a bluff. Now, what happens if you hit top pair? I mean, if I have ace-4 suited and of hearts, and it's all black cards on the flop, you know, clubs and spades on the flop, and I hit top pair, I don't really feel good about my hand. I got to be ready to, check fold that hand, because the people that are going to probably call that are going to be definitely going to probably have better aces or probably better draws, and that's really not a flop that I want. So by limping in with those kind of hands, I'll be able to get that. Again, if you could really play post-flop poker well, you could start introducing like king-high suited cards, like king-4, king-5s, and try to play that. But you also got to be able to get away from it when you do make your flush and your villains are piling in chips, because they probably have the ace-high flush there and reverse odds. So if you're not very good at reverse odds or be able to get away from a lesser flush, then I recommend not playing those type of hands. Now, if you have a speculative hand and let's say you get raised off it and you're deciding, well, should I call or fold, and you aren't really too sure, there's a really quick rule that you can apply to this, and it's called the rule of 5 of 10. Okay, so if it's going to cost you less than 5% of your stack, you can call. If it costs you more than 10% of the stack, you can just simply fold. And if somewhere in between, it's really a judgment call depending on the players, the stack sizes, and the villains and your position. So maybe like up to 8%. If I have a hand like Jack 10 and I raise from middle position and it's suited and I get called raised on the button, now you really don't know how to play the hand. Like I said, if it's less than 5%, we can simply fold it. If it's more than 10%, we can call it. And if it's more than 10%, we can, just simply fold the hand and proceed cautiously like that. So, but you definitely got to be able to play post-flop poker very well. And when you start playing with speculative hands, especially when you're out of position. Okay, so my next point that we want to talk about is using your position. Now, this is key. I mean, one of the most important thing about poker is having position. If you don't use your position well, you'll never be able to be successful at poker. However, there's nothing more important in poker than position. It's probably more important than what cards you're holding and probably your stacks, how big your stack is, because position is power. If you can be able to act last in every single hand, you'll be able to see everything in front of you. You can play much more profitably than if you're playing out of position. And when you're out of position, you kind of tend to want to be closing the action. You don't want to open it unless you have a huge monster or you're trying to induce the players to come out. So, if you just have a one pair holding and you're out of position, you just really, not saying that you have to fold there, but you want to be closing the action and trying to get to a showdown as cheaply as possible. Obviously, if you flop a huge hand, you're out of position, you got to try to maybe get ways to a guy to induce to put more chips into a pot and try to work your magic out of position there. But however, position is so key that when obviously you're going to be playing more hands closer to the button when you have position, so you can open up your range when you do have position in hand. And the good thing about also that, if you're an aggressive player in the early stages of the tournament, that, if it gets folded to you, let's say in the hijack or the cutoff, and the button's going to probably play his hand and then you'll be out of position, well, why not just raise right there and then try to steal the button and get the cutoff and the button to fold? Because especially with me, when I know I have position in hand, I have my entire toolbox of maneuvers to play. So what I mean by that is that, if you flop a flush draw, you can maybe raise the flop on the flush draw, check back the turn when it's checked to you on the turn, and then, do whatever on the river. If you get there or you don't get there, you can continuation with a bluff and just kind of barrel a third time if that's the case, or a second time if you missed your flush draw, or you can bet if you did make your flush draw. So just because you can have your whole toolbox, it really gives you your whole arsenal to use when you are using your position. So it's definitely key that you want to play more cards, and not necessarily your cards really matter much, especially if you're on the button. Your cards really don't matter as much because you're going to try with your position. Hopefully you can get these players to fold their cards even before showdown. And if that's the case, if you can get players to fold and not get into a showdown, you're using your position well. So that's one of the things that are important. And then you also be able to start picking up pots that don't belong to you. So, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And I'm just going to give you the benefits of by using those things that we just talked about in the previous. Is that if you're being active in pots, and especially early in the tournaments where you're playing a lot of hands, speculative hands, good hands, bad hands, players are going to tend not to believe you. And you don't have to put in a lot of chips early in these tournaments. You can play a lot of small pots, and just you can voluntarily put more chips into a pot. At least that's what I do. I do play a lot more hands. I'm playing suited connectors, connecting cards, big suited cards, pairs. Sometimes I'm raising them. Sometimes I'm over limping behind. If I have position, I'm playing a lot wider range. And then, I could steal pots that don't belong to me. Also, the good thing is, too, is that, when you're in a lot of pots, you're going to get it. Your image is going to be to a point where people don't believe you. So when you play a lot of hands, you're going to get paid off. And one of the things is that, I'm jabbing at all these pots. And, when you do make that hand and someone don't believe you, you can come with a haymaker and they'll pay you off. And that's the great thing. The thing is that if you're not active in these hands, and then when you finally wake up with ace king on an ace high flop, you're never going to get paid off on it. Or if not, you're not going to get enough because people are going to believe you that, hey, this guy hasn't played a pot, an ace flop, that's the perfect card that's in his range. It smashes your range, you're not going to get folded, and you're not going to get paid. And the better players are going to pick up on that. But if you're in every single pot, people are going to know that you can't have an ace every single time. So it's good to be active in there because that image that you could use can pay off dividends. And when you got to be able to know when that you can pick up pots and when you can't pick up pots. And if people are non-believers, that's exactly the image that you want to set up because by the time you come to the middle stages of the tournament or later stages of the tournament and you pick up a big pot, people aren't going to believe it and they're going to pay you off. So one thing and it's not necessarily bad too that if you do show down, let's say a busted straight draw, flush draw, or you try to bet on a busted flush draw or whatever. It's good to show that down because people won't believe you when you do have it. And that's the whole idea is that, when you don't have in those pots, you're trying to keep those pots small so you lose the minimum. But when you do get paid, you're definitely going to get paid and you're going to get paid by a big pot. So also the thing is that, if this kind of ties in with position over here, that you could pick up a lot of orphan pots. And what I mean by that is that if you're using your position well, you're going to start being able to notice how people play in front of you. If they're playing very passive and weak in front of you, by the flop or the turn, you can simply make a bet and simply just get them to fold. And sometimes, and one thing I always tell you that if you have position and it gets checked to you on the turn and you have position, you should bet regardless what your cards are because you could probably pick up all these dead money that don't belong to you. And when you do have position, that's the thing that you do is you want to be able to pick up pots that don't belong to you, that should belong to someone else's pot that are actually in yours. And this is one way that you could definitely gather a lot of chips early on. Okay, and next, when you want to talk about being at the tables and early on is, I don't really have it in here, but it's kind of identifies in here that you should also be scouting your table. And when you're scouting your table, you're going to be looking for the type of players there are. So you should be able to, after 3 or 4 orbits, when you first sit down at your table, you should be able to tag players, what type of players there are. This player is aggressive, this player is passive, this guy is tight, and this guy is weak, and so forth. And what you should be is try to identify those tight and timid players because those are the players that are going to be a good source of chips. Those are the guys that you want to be in pots with because, those tight and timid players are going to have a range that are going to probably consist of most of Broadway cards. So when you're in pots and you don't see, an ace on a flop or you don't see anything over than a 10 on that flop, it doesn't matter what your cards are. You can probably bet and they'll just fold. And those are the players that you want to be able to identify. You want to find out the players that you can go into a table and say, all right, this is the guy where my source of chips are coming from. And that also works on the other side too. That if you get an aggressive player, you know what I mean, you can use that. You could use their aggression against them. You can say, all right, against these aggressive players at the table that are not afraid, are not tight and timid, that when they put their chips into a pot, I know I got to have at least top pair or better because I can stay patient enough to wait for top pair or better because these guys are not going to fold and they're going to pay me off. So one thing you want to do is definitely be observant. You want to be able to scout your players and come up with a counter strategy to exploit their weaknesses if they're strong or aggressive. But one thing like with tight and timid players is that stealing their blinds. That's another thing that you want to be able to do later on in the tournament or even early on in the tournament. People, some of these tight and timid players, they don't defend their blinds as much as nearly they should be. And if you're a tight and timid player, you definitely want to get out of that role because that's not a winning style. It'll be very easy to play with, and you want to turn that style around entirely. Okay, now here's a good one. All right, don't get busted with aces post flop in an unraised pot. Okay, so what this basically means is, and it kind of ties into the first one that if you ever I kind of should reword this a little bit differently because you should never be limping into a pot with pocket aces. Okay, and then when you're in the early stage of the tournament, when you get pocket aces, you're going to make maybe your raise 3x, 2.5, 3x, 4x, and you might get 2 or 3 callers. All right, but the most important thing is that early stage of the tournament, I'm talking about the blinds being like less than 100 and 200, and maybe this is like maybe even pre-ante war, pre-antes, or just when the antes kicked in. You never want to get busted by pocket aces. I mean, I always say, don't give me aces or kings until later stage of the tournaments when when I have 60 big blinds or less, because that's when they're more valuable. Because aces in the in early stage of the tournament are not worth nearly as much. And one of the things that you want to realize is that when you're in an unraised pot or you're in a multi-way pot and you have pocket aces on a 10 high board and you make a raise and someone re-raises you by the turn, you got to either try to keep the pot small and try to get to a showdown and don't really put any more chips in there. But first you probably should say, I have to consider me folding here and kind of take the action given to you, what makes sense. If it's a 10 high flop and this guy called you raise and he just flattened me, maybe he limped and then you raised and then he called and now all of a sudden it's a 10 high board and he's putting all his chips into a pot, sounds to me that could easily be, a set or a 2 pair. And you don't want to go bust against those hands early. And I find myself sometimes when I'm not playing well, I get guilty where I, get a player that I don't think is very good, and I just think that maybe that he flopped top pair, top kicker, and I have an overpair with aces, and actually I run into aces or 2 pair. So just remember, and you just want to be cautious to take it slow, and when you flop top pair, when you have an overpair to the board and these guys by the turn or raise you on the river, you got to ask yourself, is your 1 pair good here? And usually when I inject that logic, I tend to fold more and say, all right, my 1 pair, because that's all a pocket aces is 1 pair in a multi-way pot is probably not good when the board is 3 to 1 suit and 3 to a straight. So you got to be disciplined enough just to get away from that and play a small pot. So one thing you could do is that, let's say the flop comes 10 high and you bet, and it has, 2 suits of 1 card, all right, and it's checked to you. What I will do is probably bet like, 2/3 of the pot, enough to that, hey, if someone's going to continue with this board, they have something here. And then if you get raised on the turn or the river, you got to be prepared to lay down with your 1 pair holding. So, and that is like one of the cardinal sins that you should never bust with 1 pair early in the tournament, especially before the antes come out, especially if it's pocket aces or kings. I mean, just play accordingly. And what I would advise you, what you should do with those hands, if you feel like that every time everyone's entering a pot and there's a huge amount of chips going in that pot, like let's say it's early stage of the tournament, you have pocket aces, and you know that, if I make a 3x, I'm going to get 4 callers. Well, guess what? Find what the breaking point is. What is that pain threshold? Is it 5x that you can get 1 customer? And that's what you want to do with that 1 customer. But be careful because, if it's aces versus queens on a queen high flop and all of a sudden, they have pocket queens and they flopped it, you got to be able to get away from those hands. And sometimes these situations are unavoidable, but, just what you got to do is just don't overplay those hands and just don't go busted on Okay, playing medium pairs and small pairs. Whoops. Let me just back that up there. All right, this one's pretty easy. In the early going, you should be playing your medium pairs like your small pairs. You should really just be set mining. So if you get a hand like pocket sevens or pocket nines on the button and someone has raised in front of you, you should not be three betting these players. Later in the tournament, the small medium pairs go way up in value. And early in tournaments, they have no value. And these are the hands, especially the small pairs from early position where I just might limp and call a raise and do that. Now, someone might be able to telegraph those moves on me, but either A, I'm going to get paid off, or if they have a piece of it when I flop my sets, you're going to get paid off on it. But you should really just be set mining with your small to medium sized pairs. So even as high as 10-10, you should maybe just be calling raises and flopping a set. Tens you might be a little bit more sticky, but nines, tens with a second pair and where there's a queen on the board, and the guy make a continuation bet, I might peel off a card and float them there. But as far as the small pairs, you just pretty much set mining right there, and it's pretty simple the way you should be playing there. Okay, the next point is don't overthink the weak bet. Okay, so this is what I see, especially early in the tournaments. Remember, when you start a tournament, you're going to get a lot of bad players, and as the tournament goes on, the weaker players tend to be eliminated, and the better players rise to the top. In the beginning of the tournament, especially when the blinds are deep and people can play more speculative hands and they're multi-way, don't overthink a weak bet. What that means, unless you peg the player as a trapping player, then you might be able to play them a little differently. But usually, a weak bet means exactly what it is a weak bet. So if you get someone that comes out and they donk really small, well, you got to be able to think, okay, what does that interpret it? What does that weak donk bet mean? Does it mean that he's just on a draw because there's two suits of one card? Did he flop top pair with a weak kicker? So if you do have a good card like top pair, top kicker, weak bet, you shouldn't be calling it. You should be reusing these players with these weak hands. And should be getting a lot of value and try to be able to put more chips in there and let these players pay you. If someone has a hand like king 10 and you have ace king on a king high board and they make like a blocking bet with these weak bets where they make a small bet just because they have a hand they like but they aren't too sure but they just want to set their own price, you want to be able to pounce on that, especially if you're holding position. So a lot of this stuff and thinking also combines with other factors that don't over weak think bet, especially if you have position. Maybe if you're out of position, maybe you just flat call and make it smaller. So it's kind of important to pay attention to those things. But generally, when someone bets 100 chips into a 700 chip pot, that is weak, and you should pounce on it. Even if I have position, I might pounce on that with any two cards that I might have there. So and usually the opposite of that is that strong bets, when someone makes a big bet, if there's 500 chips on a pot and someone makes it 2,000, they probably have a good hand there. I've seen time and time again where, someone has pocket aces and, you'll have a small pot, everybody raises to 300, and then the guy in the big blind squeezes all in for 30,000 chips for a 1,000 chip pot, and they have pocket aces there. So don't fall into that trap either. So strong bets usually mean strong early on, and weak bets mean weak. Okay. So now you don't want to be able to, you shouldn't be afraid to commit all your chips early on when it's won. Okay, so what happens when, sometimes in the early stage of the tournament, you're really, my style is not really to get all my chips in there. I'm not the type of person, my style of play is not to get all the chips unless I am close or near the nuts. But there are going to be certain situations will come up, and occasionally during a tournament where you're going to flop a set against a flush draw and you just want to get all your chips in there. And sometimes they'll call you with that flush draw and they'll get there. And you got to be okay with that. The money went in, as a big favorite, or you're a big favorite or a slight favorite, the money went in, and so speak it. Sometimes they're going to hit their flush draw, sometimes they're not. You just can't be results oriented there. You just got to be confident that you got them to commit all your chips in there early. So don't be afraid with those situations where, to put those chips in there into the pot early. Maybe you flop bottom two pair and this guy has an over pair and you just want to be able to build that pot and be able to get all those chips in there, where someone will definitely overplay top pair. And if you have a weak flush draw and that there's straights and sets out there, don't be afraid to get all your chips in there knowing that it's not possible that they have a bigger flush or a bigger straight than you. So so there are going to be times and points where you want to be able to just get all your chips early, because it's especially early in the tournament. If you could double your stack way early, it gives you a lot of more animation to do all the stuff we're saying here even more. And that's what I love, to have a big stack early, because I'm doing all this stuff with that. It just gives me more ammo, and it's very important not to get paid off on those big hands when you can. And when there's a player that has made a huge raise pre-flop, and you just called with your pocket tens and you flopped your set of tens, and he has an overpair, don't be afraid to put all the chips in there. That's for sure. Lastly, also, when you're up against a bully at your table that's has a lot of chips, and he's playing every single hand, and he's just trying to run over the whole table. When you get top pair and you only have one pair in this spot, this is another spot where I'm not afraid to get all my chips in there, because my range so far crushes his range. And sure, sometimes you're going to run into it, because those players will get paid off, when they do flop top two pair. But these guys are the same type of pair, will also, call you down for all their chips with a weak ace. And you can't be afraid against those guys. You just got to be able to stand up to them when you have a hand that you think is crushing their range. Okay, and lastly, you want to make adjustments for online play. Now, there's a big difference between online play and live play. Live play, they're going to be, tournaments tend to be a little bit tighter than online, just because, if you're playing a live play, it means you had to drive somewhere to play this live play, or people had to drive to your place and play. So if it's a home game, or if you're going to a casino, or if you're flying across the country for a huge tournament, or driving long distances, people tend to play a little bit tighter during live play. Now, granted, there's these lot of multi-re-entry tournaments where that's totally not opposite, where during these re-entry tournaments, during the re-entry period, it almost plays like an online play. And you want to definitely make adjustments where, your smaller hands, where, online, where if you're online, you have like jacks and queens, you're probably going to get it all in, and not afraid to fold and get all your chips with pocket queens. Where in online, maybe with pocket queens might be your cutoff point, where you would just flat pre-flop, not trying to get all the chips in, try not getting all the chips in there. So you definitely want to be able to make the adjustments between online and live play. Where online play, you're going to see hands a lot more, you're going to see a lot more crazier action, a lot looser action. Because another thing is that generally, when you play online, you're against players that they don't know you, they don't know who you are. All that is your screen name out there, and you don't know what's going on. And if you lose, they can fire up another game and go from there. Or they don't know who you are, they don't care. They feel protected that they can make a stupid play and just totally get away with it online. Where if you make a stupid play live, you get these people leaving a table, they're making fun of you, or you're afraid that people are going to be criticizing your play. Where online, it's going to definitely be looser, and people are going to give a lot less. So hopefully that these guidelines helped you for accumulating some chips early. This is what has helped me in the past, and hopefully this will be able to help you gather some chips early as well. We could also talk about in other videos where how to be more aggressive and get in more specifics about that. But I think this is a pretty good general overview from early play. And when we defined early play was like, pre-ante, or just like a level or two after the antes kicked in, and how I generally play a lot of pots. When you're starting, generally all these things that we talked about were over like 100 big blinds, or between like 80 plus big blinds, where, what you should be doing at the tables. So hopefully this has helped, and good luck at the tables. We'll catch you next time.